We are going to take a very short break from this edition of The Point. When we return, the U.S. blacklisted Huawei 6 months ago, but almost immediately allowed for exceptions. What impact has the blacklisting really had on the Chinese telecoms giant? Stay with us. Chinese telecoms giant Huawei has called on the U.S. government to remove it from the so-called entity list after Washington granted another reprieve for Huawei's U.S. business partners. On Monday, the Trump administration granted a third 90-day reprieve to U.S. businesses having contacts or having business relations with Huawei since the company was blacklisted in mid-May. Yet that blacklisting may have never truly gone into effect for at least two reasons. U.S. firms selling components to Huawei immediately pressed for relief, and rural Americans rely heavily on Huawei networks for their wireless services. So is this a blacklisting in name only with no real impact on the company? And what's the end game if China-U.S. trade talks reach a final deal? Will the targeting of Huawei end too? Joining the discussion in the Beijing studio are Zhang Fan, Associate Professor at Beijing Normal University, and Professor Zhang Gong of the University of International Business and Economics. Gentlemen, welcome to The Point. First, let's take a look at the response, the latest response from Huawei, which says the temporary general license won't actually have a substantial impact on Huawei's business either way. The decision does not change the fact that Huawei continues to be treated unfairly either. We have long held that the decision by the U.S. Department of Commerce to add Huawei to the entity list has caused more harm to the U.S. than to Huawei. This has done significant economic harm to American companies with which Huawei does business and has already disrupted collaboration and undermined the mutual trust on which the global supply chain depends. We call on the U.S. government to put an end to this unjust treatment and remove Huawei from the entity list. So, gentlemen, your first reaction to the reaction of Huawei to the U.S. Commerce Department's third reprieve since May. John.
Well, my reaction to Huawei's reaction is that, what it says is very much true. I think it's not going to have a major impact on Huawei's operation. Huawei is developing its own solutions, also solutions from third parties in other countries other than the United States. So I think this response from Huawei is mostly talking about American suppliers to Huawei. But I think it does have an impact on Huawei's continued servicing the rural carriers in the United States. I think if we don't have this reprieve, these telecom companies will not be able to buy parts and components from Huawei. And I think it's very important for the rural telecoms operation in the United States.
So, as we said, since May, there have been 3 reprieves. So basically, this ban, this entity list, never really went into effect. But I mean, Huawei's case.
In a de facto way, I mean, it is. That's what's happening. Right?
So what is the U.S. trying to do by prolonging this reprieve? Is it not ready to sanction Huawei or to stop businesses from Americans to Huawei? Or why does it have to postpone or extend again and again and again, the third time, Zhang?
Well, so the first time around is because they didn't really think it through before they put the ban into place.
And still they haven't thought it through.
Well,
they still need time to think.
The third time, now they really don't want to spook the market by imposing the ban, actual ban. And then because for the last few months or so, the U.S. stock market has really been moving relating to the trade talks. And right now, we're coming up towards the end of the year. I'm not sure whether this is the reason, but they should know this. Towards the end of the year, that's when people's pension funds, 401ks, get marked to the market by the stock price at the end of the year. If they do something to spook the market right now, that report card is going to be sent to U.S. pension holders. That's basically all the voters. 9 months later, that's end of September, just 1 month before general election. So, yeah, I don't think.
So you think it's a political move?
It's status quo, maintaining the current situation, and then telling the market that the trade talks are going, we haven't reached anything, so they can't put it back. Right. But they're not going to make it worse unnecessarily. So.
Okay. John,
well, I think the primary objective is to prevent Huawei from selling telecom equipment into the U.S. Carrier market. I mean, clearly this is the first priority. At the same time, it doesn't want to also harm American companies. These are mostly semiconductor companies in the United States of supplying these semiconductor products to Huawei. They don't want to see these companies losing their business to other competitors. Provided Huawei is actually indeed developing other options, right? So I think the reprieve is very much motivated by lobbying of these companies. I think companies like Intel, like Skyworks, Qorvo. These companies are key vendors for Huawei, and they are lobbying heavily out of the concern that they will lose Huawei's business forever. That's their concern.
Which is not totally impossible. By the way, it's expected that Huawei every year buys $11 billion.
$11 billion, yeah. Huawei is a $100 billion company. It buys like 10% of its cost from American companies in the United States.
So there's a very important factor also being mentioned by U.S. Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross in his statement explaining the reprieve. He said the temporary general license extension will allow carriers to continue to service customers in some of the most remote areas of the United States who would otherwise be left in the dark. So it's a pretty indispensable service that Huawei is providing.
Well, I mean, Huawei's
Huawei's
carrier customer base in the United States are mostly those rural carriers, okay? And these companies are usually using some federal money. In the United States, there's something called a Universal Service Fund. Every subscriber pays a little bit of money to the Universal Service Fund. This money is used by the federal government to subsidize rural carriers. And previously, there's a decree saying that those companies using federal money are barred from using equipment from Huawei, right? Now they're providing this relief, essentially allowing Huawei to continue to service these telecom carriers in rural communities, because the service is not going to be just buying the equipment. That's it. It has to be continued service and maintenance. So there's going to be an ongoing relationship. So they have to rely on Huawei for these services.
So it's not just political.
It's
basically, so long as these services are not replaced by any other company, they would have to allow Huawei to service these people.
Well, the telecom equipment in a carrier environment is very sticky. The relationship is actually very sticky. It's very difficult to switch a vendor. I mean, you can't just swap out equipment and introduce another equipment. It has to be tested, it has to be trialed, and it has to be smooth. So this transition, even if they want to phase out Huawei equipment, it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take some time.
Do you think that is happening?
I think at least for the 5G, in the 5G technologies, the rural carriers are not going to use Huawei equipment, that's for sure. But they're still deploying some, there are already some 3, 4G equipment already in place currently providing services to the customers, so that these equipment will not be able to be swapped out that easily.
Zhang Fan, any opinion on this to add here?
Right, so they already bought equipment and they're asked to rip them out, and that's very expensive and time consuming. So they're basically asking money subsidies from the US Congress, and they're waiting for that to come into effect.
Yeah, well, I think it is rather peculiar for me, because when the U.S. Commerce Department rolled out this decision to put Huawei on the entity list, first of all, they didn't think about, I don't know, the stock market volatility, whatever the factor that Zhang Fan was talking about, and then the rural areas. Did they not think it through before they do that? Now they have to, one reprieve, another reprieve. Do they want to reprieve forever, or?
Clearly not. So first of all, the U.S. suppliers, Huawei buys $10 billion of stuff every year. So if you rip that cold turkey, a lot of companies is going to have cash flow problems. They're not even going to be an ongoing concern. So obviously they can't just cut it off. So this kind of reprieve is a necessity. And even for longer term, I mean, both Microsoft and Google even came out and say, by forcing Huawei to develop its own operating system, you're really jeopardizing our market monopoly. Mind you, operating system is the weakest point for Huawei.
That's right.
They're already this concerned. So,
yeah. I also want to add a note about the rural carriers. These are companies that are usually under a lot of financial stress. They're serving poor communities, remote communities, and essentially what the Department of Commerce has been doing is essentially to force these companies to buy more expensive equipment from, say, Ericsson and Nokia, and not as good equipment like Huawei does, right? So essentially, it's a double whammy hit to these rural telecom carriers, right? I mean, it's essentially a tax on the rural communities in the United States. These are hardworking people. A lot of people are Trump voters, and they're going to be very happy about this.
And never they have found any evidence substantiate their claim that, you know, telecommunications, that Huawei pose national security risk.
Of course not.
Have
I mean,
we
there's
heard
not a
anything
shred of
about
evidence so far, right? I mean, it's all based on theory. It's all hypothesis. So,
well, yeah, and then there's also, if we want to do a little bit of a conspiracy theory, I mean, being too safe might be a problem. If, say, your security agents was able to hack into some other thing, and then Huawei came out and prevent you from doing that, then that does represent degradation of your. No,
but
they're never going to say that, even if that's the reason. But whatever.
Well, I understand that, and also for national security, you don't want to take risks. But exactly to what degree, whether there are any way to manage that, and obviously a lot of governments, some Western governments have decided that it is worth to take that risk, right? They have not banned having Huawei participating in their 5G.
I got two comments about what you said. First of all, Huawei company has been turned upside down by the U.S. government ever since 10 years ago. I mean, the investigation of Huawei has been going on for over a decade. So everything the U.S. government has done, it has already done. And they have intruded Huawei's network. They have, you know, look at their codes, look at their equipment, everything possible they have done. They still haven't found a shred of evidence of sort of a backdoor existing. So if you look at what Mike Pompeo is saying in Europe, he's saying Huawei can be potentially used as a means for Chinese government to open the backdoor. So potential, what does that mean? It's a hypothesis, right? So there's no evidence so far. Second, even regarding the security, the risk about deploying 5G equipment, look at what has been done with UK. There's a joint lab established in London, right, between between the UK intelligence agency and Huawei to look at their equipment, they look at their codes. So from UK's perspective, and they've made decision that this risk can be managed, basically. So I don't understand why U.S. government takes a very different position on this.
So eventually, so basically, is the Huawei case a card that the U.S. government is dangling for trade negotiation, Zhang Fan, very briefly?
Well, you never know, because there's Trump and there's the people in the Trump administration, and those people, they really see Huawei as a strategic competitor. It doesn't really matter whether it's whatever reason, whatever the excuse to attack Huawei. Getting rid of competitor is the
I totally agree. I think Trump probably takes this as a bargaining chip, but there are people around him, especially people in the intelligence community. They've been for 10 years going after Huawei, and they haven't produced anything yet. I think these people don't treat it as a bargaining chip in the negotiation for trade.
All right, we have to leave it there. Many thanks to Zhang Fan from Beijing Normal University and Zhong Gong from the University of International Business and Economics. And with that, we come to the end of this edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin. As always, you can find me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle The Point with Alex. Thanks for watching. You've got The Point.